And what with programs on the air, I keep pretty much to myself. Mr. Saturday Dance, heard the crowd at the floor, couldn't bear it without you, don't get around much anymore.
Hi, I'm Jayne Mansfield. I'd like you to come along with me. I want you to share some of the wild, way-out experiences I had during my last trip around the world.
On the face of it, Jayne Mansfield was the archetypal 1950s Hollywood dumb blonde. But behind the pin-up image was a complex and intelligent woman whose hunger for fame drove her from global success to untimely self-destruction.
She scientifically mapped out the route to Hollywood success.
When you saw a girl with a 40-inch bust, you went, holy cow.
Jayne was never more to me than a pinup.
She became a very sad figure, a joke.
Her IQ was 163, which is, you know, a near genius level.
I said, what you wearing underneath? She opens it up. Nothing. Nothing.
Jayne was born Vera Jane Palmer on April 19, 1933. The family settled in Penn, Argyll, a sleepy middle-class town in Pennsylvania. Her mother, Vera, provided a schoolteacher's discipline, whilst her father, Herbert, doted on her. But he died tragically when Jayne was just 3.
He was just coming back from a medical. He had been checked, and he was given a clean bill of health. And on the way home, he keeled over with a heart attack in the car and died. And Jayne was in the car at the time.
Even at the age of 3, that was a very traumatic experience that I think Jayne carried her whole life.
Young Jayne showed a remarkable aptitude for the violin, but she was also starstruck from an early age.
Ever since she was a child, she always had pictures of glamorous movie stars on her wall and would practice, you know, doing her hair and her makeup and wearing her mother's jewelry at a very early age. Her mother would dress her up like Shirley Temple, and she would sing and dance. She'd see a sultry or a sexy move or a very pretty feminine look, and she would imitate it.
Jayne was an only child, and the isolation of her early life seemed to empower her in a way that allowed her to cope with the stresses of Hollywood.
When her mother remarried, the family moved to Dallas. Jayne developed early and was soon proving popular with the local young men.
I mean, she was boy crazy from like the age of 11 on. She was probably dating, you know, fairly regularly by the age of 13, 14 years old.
So it wasn't surprising when Jayne became pregnant at 15. But she was rescued by older student Paul Mansfield.
Late January, we just decided to elope. In a fever, hotter than a couple of cats, you know. So that was our story, I think.
With the birth of Jane Marie in 1950, there was, for a while, a veneer of domestic harmony.
From the time Jayne was 80 in 1920, she realized there was something saleable about herself.
But Jane's early dreams of stardom soon resurfaced, and she went on the beauty queen pageant trail.
You know, from Miss Photo Flash to
Queen of Refrigeration Week, Queen of Palm Springs Desert Rodeo.
Miss Cadillac to
Cherry Blossom Queen, Queen Cotton, Nylon Queen,
Queen of the Market,
Queen of the Chihuahua Show, Princess of the Freeways, Miss Negligee, Miss Tomato.
There was only one title in her history of being crowned anything that she turned down, and that was to be Miss Roquefort Cheese, because she said it didn't sound right.
Gaining attention and having her name on people's lips was really the thing that opened doors everywhere.
Say, Jane, you've been crowned Queen of Uranium, Miss Peanut Butter and Jelly, Miss Bluebonnet Belle of Texas, and amongst other things, I think you were once crowned Queen of Stalled Crosstown Traffic.
Oh, my.
Now, of all your honors, which title do you cherish the most?
You know which title I like?
No,
I like to be called Mother.
Touche, dear. That sums it up. You are neither naive or any of the other things.
Oh, all right.
But with her appetite for publicity whetted, there was only one place to go.
She had the bags packed. I mean, there was no hesitation and there was no time wasted. They were on their way.
In 1952, aged just 19, Jane persuaded a reluctant Paul to take the family to Hollywood. In the mid-1950s, the Hollywood Dream Factory was in full swing. After wartime austerity, the studios were busy peddling a more daring image of female sexuality. Busty blonde bombshells were the order of the day. After years of studying fan magazines, Jane knew how to oblige by dyeing her hair and making the most of what nature had given her.
From childhood on, she wanted stardom. She was very interested in becoming a celebrity. And so with her high intelligence, she figured out what did she need to do, what assets did she need to promote.
Jayne Mansfield came from a time when we did not speculate, gee, you know, is it real or is it Memorex? I mean, in those days, everything was real. You know, when you saw a girl with a 40-inch bust, you went, holy cow, because this was homegrown.
The 1950s was not a period when you wanted a Katharine Hepburn type, an intelligent woman.
The bigger the bust, the better. They just wanted hourglass-shaped women, voluptuous, and they wanted them blonde.
Blonde is now the sign of sexuality. In the 1920s, the blonde was the virginal sweet woman, but by the 50s, she's the opposite, thanks to peroxide, thanks to the ability to change the color of your hair.
Jane filled the bill. Jayne Mansfield really filled the bill in all directions.
I mean, the first thing that Jane did when she moved to Hollywood was she got the number for Paramount Studios in the telephone book and called them up.
I did a soliloquy from Joan of Arc for Milton Lewis, who was the head of casting at Paramount Studios, in order to audition, and he just seemed to think that I was wasting my, as he said, obvious talents.
It wasn't long before Jane used her more obvious talents, publicising Underwater, a Jane Russell film.
You know, they used to do these things in Hollywood. Would send out a tour of people, and they'd do little shows, and they'd come to your town, and woo-woo, and they'd have a few, you know, pretty Hollywood girls. And so I think that's all she was on that press junket. But what she did was, she completely upstaged Jane Russell, the star.
She borrowed a bathing suit that was way too small, and, you know, it didn't really matter very much because she intended, you know, on jumping into the water and coming back up without it. And that's exactly what she did.
Because while Jane would say, okay, that's enough pictures, Jane Russell, Jayne Mansfield would be going, hi, boys. I mean, wherever there was a camera, this woman was pointed toward it, man. She would just point those searchlights right at that lens. And that's why the press loved her. And the press really built her. Photographers really built her because they loved her.
And it put her on the cover of every newspaper and, you know, periodical that there was at that time.
I understand that Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell both are quietly simmering at you. First, because of your takeoff on Monroe, and secondly, because you upstaged Jane Russell at a photography studio.
Gee, I'm awfully sorry to hear that. I really didn't mean to do that. I don't remember the incident.
I see. Very interesting.
She would put herself into whatever kind of a situation would help to advance her, and that's good.
All the major studios, MGM, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, you know, they all wanted to get hold of her because she was a hot property.
Do you remember the famous picture, and I'm sure you do, of Jayne Mansfield at a Hollywood function, and it's a table, and sitting at the table is Sophia Loren, and leaning over is Jayne Mansfield, and she's sort of like that, and she's leaning over like this with this cleavage, I mean almost everything revealed. And Sophia Loren, who had quite a cleavage on her own, is like this, looking into her cleavage like, oh my God. That's what she did with Jane Russell. That's what got her on the map, not as an actress, but as a movie star.
I'm sure that Jayne Mansfield came to Hollywood determined, they all do. If you don't come prepared to kill the competition, don't come.
And so I think she very calculatedly decided that this is the pathway. She understood what the images were. She understood that people are typecast, that stereotypes run the show. And so that she was going to play into that stereotype.
I think Jayne Mansfield got into Hollywood because of her extraordinary shape. Jayne Mansfield was nearly a comic book creation. She's almost a drawn figure. The director with whom she was most closely associated in those early films, Frank Tashlin, was a comic book artist, and I think that's what he saw in her.
Labeled by Time magazine, Sex on the Rocks.
Jayne's first part was in Female Jungle. It was a walk-on part for Frank Tashlin, for which she was paid $100.
How do you do, honey?
What she literally did was go out and buy a ticket to go and watch herself on the movie screen, which was an amazing moment for her. For her, it was a life-changing experience to see herself 20 feet high on the movie screen.
She's a man-crazy blonde.
Fire in your lips, and you can be tender when you want to.
The 1950s represent the second generation of women movie stars, those who were born in the 30s and come of age in the 50s. It's after World War II. There are developing, I think, more restrictions on images of women in film.
Basically, Jayne Mansfield flaunted the code to the degree that she did through comedy. And comedy is always the easier way of getting around things. If you make a joke, it's a little more acceptable. And Frank Tashlin made fun of Jayne Mansfield's breasts, basically, which was not perhaps the kindest thing to do to her.
6 weeks? Oh, easy, Fats. It takes time. Rome wasn't built in a day.
She ain't Rome. What we're talking about is already built.
But in an age where there was this incredible repressed lust for the breast, and just waiting for it to burst out, hers were the biggest and the closest to breaking out of any, and it was a joke.
And man, oh, Mansfield. Jayne Mansfield, that is.
But the formula worked, and under Tashlin's direction, her next film, The Girl Can't Help It, was a box office hit. Jayne was co-starring with the rock and roll stars of the day and relishing the niche she created with her sex appeal.
Sex appeal is a wonderful, warm, womanly, healthy feeling. If you're a woman, it's womanly. If you're not, it's manly.
Does it come from inside, Miss Mansfield?
It comes only from inside. It is nothing that's manufactured. It has nothing to do with measurements or lipstick color. To me, it's cleanliness and youth and an effervescent desire to enjoy life. That's what sex appeal is to me. It's sort of the vibrancy that you find present in a young kitten.
But she is the perfect embodiment of that moment when the censorship is still controlling it, but you feel the ground shaking.
Oh, I've been in men's bedrooms before.
But back home, Paul was finding Jayne's growing status as a sex symbol too much.
And I could see that she was going places, and that was good for her. Really, this wasn't what I had bargained for.
But everyone figures me for a sex pot. No one thinks I'm equipped for motherhood.
The understanding between them was always very clear. He had one perception of life and of what family should be, and Jayne had a diametrically opposite feeling about that.
Paul was supportive to appease Jayne, but I don't think that he honestly truly believed that she was going to take off the way that she did.
It wasn't right. It seemed wrong to me. So along about the spring of '55, probably, we separated.
Honey, several weeks ago, you broke the headlines with a story from California, or maybe it was Texas, that your estranged husband, Paul Mansfield, wanted to take custody of your child away from you.
Yes.
How did this headache finally resolve?
Well, actually, I think it is entirely resolved right now, Hi. I served my husband with papers, as you know, because I was filing for divorce. And I had to wait a whole year before I could file as a resident of California. I had to wait a year until I was actually a resident. So I did file, and naturally, since he still attempts to keep me as his wife, he can only choose to contest the divorce. But the whole thing will be settled very soon, I think possibly within 2 or 3 months.
With her divorce finalised, Jayne seems set on the road to stardom. But despite the film's relative success at the box office, the expected flood of film offers did not materialise, and her contract with Warner's was not renewed.
Really, 2 years after she arrived in Hollywood with the death of the Warner's contract, it looked like it was all over, and the only option then was Broadway.
Jayne moved to New York in the middle of 1955 to take the leading role in Will Success' Spoil Rock Hunter, which debuted on Broadway that October.
She didn't want to do it. She wanted to be a movie star, but really Warner's had failed. The kind of stuff she was doing in Female Jungle had failed for her, and she was seen as being something of an oddity. So going back to Broadway was her second chance. Played for 460 performances, and during that period, she went out on the streets of Manhattan and she continued the publicity beat. So she did what she was doing in Hollywood. She basically went and publicized herself to the point of exhaustion.
The publicity paid off. Jayne was hailed as a great success and attracted rave reviews from the press. With everything looking up, Jayne was now on the lookout for Mr. Right.
From a stage, you're looking down, you see, and it wasn't difficult to miss her, you know, she's blonde, and she was drinking a milkshake, which has impressed me too.
Mariska Hargitay had already established a reputation as a beefcake by winning Mr. Universe in 1955.
Jayne was just totally dumbstruck when she saw Mickey. There was just something there. It was a light bulb or a star, a sparkle that really clicked. And you know, the waiter asked her, you know, what she'd like, and she said, "I'll take a steak and that man on the right."
I meet Jayne, Jayne meets me, and we fall in love. It's like a fairy tale. Better than Harry Potter ever could be.
As the relationship hotted up, Jayne's thoughts soon turned to taking her new man back to Hollywood.
I said, I gotta get back to Hollywood. He said, I want to raise the kids there, I want to live there. And he said, leave New York. And I said, well, we're gonna figure out something for that.
Jayne's hunger for movie stardom persisted, and so Mickey suggested a film version of Will Success' Spoil Rock Hunter.
So I talked to Bill Schifrin. Anyway, I told Bill, I said, Bill, get her a contract in the studio and make the studio buy the play. As soon as they buy a play, they're gonna make motion pictures, we're gonna come to Hollywood, everything's gonna be hunky-dory, Jayne and I are gonna get married, we're gonna have another kids, and everything's gonna be fine. That's exactly what happened.
Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, the howling Broadway comedy hit?
Leave and walk out on all this publicity?
And Mariska Hargitay as the Gorilla Man. Jayne's really got him up a tree. And accompanying Jayne on this mad whirl are all of the wonderful pals who made the play one of Broadway's most delight-filled entertainments.
Probably Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter is her best movie because it is a spoof of Hollywood. It's a spoof of popular culture. And many of Jayne Mansfield's admirers claim that she was really quite an intelligent woman who was very consciously playing this image of the dumb blonde.
I'm Rockwell Hunter, Miss Barlow.
Rockwell Hunter? His name sounds influential. His name only so happens to be Rockwell Hunter. What do you do?
I work for LaSalle Jr., Raskin, Pooley, and Crockett. The advertising agency?
Oh, those names, how crazy influential. He's a very big influential advertising man, that's all he is. What do you do there?
I write TV commercials.
Oh, no.
TV commercials. Oh, no, I couldn't go for a guy who did that. Could I?
It's the only kind you've missed.
Everything was working just like clockwork. And on January 13th, 1958, we get married.
Jayne and Mickey were public property by this time. Hordes of press photographers and thousands of fans flocked to the church for their wedding. Jayne, swathed in pink lace from head to toe, never looked happier, and the newfound King and Queen of Hollywood delighted in sharing their special day. And behind the continuous string of public engagements, the couple enjoyed some more playful private moments.
There was a big situation with her, what she's going to wear. And I said, well, don't wear anything. And she's got her makeup on, she's got everything. And she said, honey, we're ready to go. When I get to the car, she had a white, snow white mink coat on. And I said, gee, it looks great, that's wonderful. And I said, what you wearing underneath? She opens it up. Nothing. Nothing. And I said, gee, it's great. Let's go. And we went through, and we had fun. We had fun, and every so often she did the little flash for me, you know, and I started laughing, and I said, oh my God, this is what's going on here, you know.
The lady is much too hot to handle.
Jayne's next contract set about building her image as a serious actress and a bankable star in the film Too Hot to Handle.
I'll say things in your life, and you've dirtied your hands many times, but you never had blood on them.
You know that? Miss Sullivan, I want to see you right away.
Johnny, you go for a gun, and I'll stop you. I know enough to stop you, Johnny.
And you waved goodbye to the classic parts at that time.
I did until about 3 months ago when I came to Britain to film Too Hot to Handle, and now I'm filming The Challenge. And these two roles afford me the dramatic parts I've always prayed for and wished for.
Thank you very much, Miss Mansfield.
Thank you.
Jayne Mansfield was said to be a lot more intelligent in person than she was ever allowed to be on screen, and it may be her misfortune that she had an intelligence that didn't photograph. I don't know.
You had to be very smart to handle it, to be a dumb blonde. You got to be a genius to do it, and she did a hell of a job.
Her IQ was 163, which is, you know, a near genius level. You know, she could speak fluent Italian, you know, fluent French, you know, fluent German.
When she had an interview, she sometimes would say intelligent things, but she didn't lord it over everybody else how intelligent she was. She stayed within the image that she projected on the screen.
Jayne, do you think that there's more money playing dumb instead of smart?
More money playing dumb? I think if you're a smart girl, if you are handed roles of a dumb blonde, possibly you would be considered smart to take some dumb blonde roles, but others you can turn down.
And playing the dumb blonde proved an extremely successful strategy. Jayne's popularity was at an all-time high. The studio sent her on a promotional tour of Europe, culminating in her meeting the Queen at the Royal Command performance. Jayne certainly made an impression with British audiences.
She couldn't get enough attention anywhere. She just loved to be the center of attention. She loved riding around on her husband's shoulders, the bodybuilder Mariska Hargitay, so that the two of them would get attention. She loved dressing alike with him. They really enjoyed the limelight.
I don't particularly enjoy publicity. It seems to follow me around all my life for some reason. Everything I do seems to make headlines. I don't know why that is. Some people have that kind of a life, and I think I was born into it.
Jayne would do anything for publicity and to make money. I'm not at all surprised if she would sell her own bath water or maybe blonde locks from a haircut. She knew the power of publicity and money, and she wanted it all.
I got some photos here. You were riding side saddle on a large telephone dial.
Doesn't everybody?
Then here is one where you were in London, and you were cutting the ribbon to formally dedicate the opening of a new $25 million bridge in West London.
I think it's this man on the left offered me a bulldog, a marvelous bulldog, if I'd do this.
And this was in exchange for opening a bridge for
Well,
him.
I also was, I was recompensed monetarily.
Ah.
Never one to shirk publicity, Jayne used her British stay to make another extensive round of money-spinning personal appearances, featuring some unlikely venues. Riding the wave of success, Jayne and Mickey looked to new ways of employing their combined talents, launching their own Las Vegas cabaret act in 1959.
I was fortunate. I was trained as an acrobat, and I had an adagio dance team way back when I was a kid back in Hungary. Started back when I was 16 years old. So anyway, Jayne and I started exercising and training, and literally this girl, unbelievable. She became accomplished acrobat, throwing up in the air and doing all kind of tricks. So then everybody knew it in Hollywood that we're preparing for a show for Las Vegas, or House of Love. That was a title. And we signed up for $25,000.
Which was unheard of money. I mean, she was only making $2,500 a week on her 7-year contract, and here she was making $25,000, you know, for 1 week's work. It was amazing.
But you know, Jayne never did make $1 million, $2 million a picture. She never did. Jayne made her money from personal appearances, going to nightclubs. She'd walk up, sing 2 songs, and they'd give her $20,000.
We felt like millionaires after Las Vegas. And then we had a return engagement, so everything was rolling.
The couple's domestic dreams were completed with the birth of sons Mickey Jr. and Zoltan.
Hello, Miss Mansfield. This is Robert Robinson here. I wonder if you're at home.
Oh, yes, Mr. Robinson. Please come in. I'll open the gate for you.
Thank you very much.
With their hard-earned wealth, they paid $75,000 in 1960, the equivalent of $4 million today, for a mansion on Sunset Boulevard. The Pink Palace became Mickey's expression of his love for Jayne.
Jayne and I walked into this house and seen a beautiful entrance hall. I looked in the living room, I saw a balconies. I looked at Jayne, she looked at me, and I said, "That's it." She said, "Yes, that's it." So we bought the house.
A succession of reporters were invited into her home, so even Jayne's private life became public property.
At the front door, shoes are compulsorily removed. This is to safeguard the carpets, which lie in great warm drifts across the floors.
How do you get the tracks out of the carpet, Miss Mansfield?
We let our butler do that. He has a jolly good time, believe me. In fact, our entire home was drawn up. We drew up our plans, and then we went and had everything custom made.
She loved everything hard. I said, "Okay, I'll build you a heart-shaped pool." So she had a heart-shaped pool, and the kids growing up and the whole thing. So it was wonderful.
That was something that she just loved and embraced, and then it became, you know, an image for her, a marketable image, the pink heart-shaped world, which Jayne always wanted so intensely.
Oh, I remember it being somewhat like a big amusement park, kind of like a playground, and I had a wonderful time as a youngster just growing up. The tourists that always came by that looked in through the gates and pointed their fingers and stuff like that.
As a heart-shaped, it looks like a sofa or even a container. At this end of the room, it's full of what I take to be your children's teddy bears and so forth.
Well, those are my teddy bears. My children had their own in the nursery.
I mean, her goal was she wanted to have 12 children. She really was on her way to get there. She loved being a mother.
She was always happy. She used to knit. She get pregnant, you know, big stomach. And she was used to knit, you know, and everything was happy.
She was always a very good manager of her time. You know, be having babies, have this incredible career, be flying here, flying there, making movies, doing personal appearances, and still be a mother to her children because it was very important to her. She didn't want other people to raise her children, and she wanted to make sure that that didn't happen.
This is rather like being in a cave of pink fur.
Yes.
Because there's fur on the walls, fur on the ground, and fur on the ceiling. Well, it's actually carpet, I take it, all the way around.
Like being hugged all the time by a great big pink teddy bear.
I mean, when I was a youngster, I just had chihuahuas all over the place.
She loved the kids, she loved her home, she loved to cook. She loved to be around the kids, loved to be around animals.
My dad one time picked up a donkey in a field that he got driving in Thousand Oaks, and he picked it off the thing, paid some guy $50, brought it home to her in his arms, and said, "Here, honey, here's the big old donkey." He carried it in the door. So this is the kind of stuff. I mean, she loved it. She loved that kind of life.
And then here's this heart-shaped gold mosaic bath. Who designed that?
My husband designed it. It has pink marble on the outside and gold faucets and the gold, as you said, the gold mosaic in the bottom.
When she cooked sometimes, she loved to make sometimes spaghetti sauce. Well, I tell you, spaghetti sauce in the ceiling, in the floor, in the wall, all over the place. So I tell you, we had a fabulous life with the kids, and it was totally different from a glamour, what you see, and she was such a fun-loving person. So it was different what the public knew.
But the idyllic family life was not all hearts and pink champagne. By 1962, Jayne was already beginning to tire of her role as domestic goddess. A second honeymoon with Mickey in the Bahamas ended in disaster when the boat they were in capsized and the couple had to be rescued. For the first time, Jayne's hunger for publicity had worked against her.
Down in the Bahamas, it was reported that you and your husband, Mickey, and a press agent were missing overnight in shark-infested waters. The press took a look at it as though it was just another publicity stunt because you were involved in it. Now, here's a photograph taken the next day, and when I looked at it, and we were discussing it up at the Tribune, I said, this is not a fake. No one can look the way Jayne looks and the way Mickey looks here and do this just for publicity. Now, you can understand, though, why you are suspect, can't you?
If I had twin babies, people would think it was for a publicity stunt. I never thought in my life, after having gone through what we went through down there, that anyone could doubt it being true. I even don't like to discuss it. It was through the wonderful help of the dear Lord that we were saved.
As the 1960s moved into full swing, the boundaries of propriety were changing. Returning to films, Jayne found herself having to risk more to move with the times.
There is that feeling all through the 1950s particularly, that one day soon, the wicked boys in the audience, and I was one of them, are gonna see a tit. And it was one of the reasons to go to the movies. And you know, you felt the line was getting lower and lower. And Mansfield had the most impressive breasts in mainstream film. And you just felt something's got to give, something's got to break. And of course, by the 60s, everything comes off.
Film offers had dwindled, so Jayne leapt at the chance offered by actor-director Tommy Noonan to star in Promises, Promises, even though it meant bearing all for the first time.
If you look at the periods of Jayne's life, the period of Rock Hunter and the Frank Tashlin movies was really the peak. And after that, when she found herself in England with Fox kind of throwing discards or second-rate movies to her, she kind of realized the extent of her failure and became quite paranoid and was vulnerable to her greatest weakness, which was opportunistic men.
That was such taboo at that time. That was just the biggest no-no that any star could do, would to pose nude for a magazine. And, you know, Jayne so freely did that, not thinking twice about it.
From above, I hear bluebirds sing new words so clear and strong. Enraptured, I'm captured by love's sweet song. Lu-lu-lu-lu, lu-lu-lu-lu, lu-lu-lu-lu. I'm in love.
Whatever degree of nakedness she achieved on screen, there was a nakedness of the attempt to be sexy. I think that when you try too hard and too brazenly to be sexy in film, you always risk the ridiculous.
There was a period of free fall. Jayne went every direction, basically looking for movie offers. And the movies she made were independent movies. They were not studio-associated movies because the studios had given up on her.
Jayne still yearned for the opportunity to prove her worth as a movie star, but unfortunately the screen roles on offer by the early 60s weren't helping her career.
Oh, Irving! Oh, I'm hurt! What happened? It's bleeding! It's bleeding! Now, don't you be brave. You just come with me.
The studios got an incredible amount of money from overseas studios to loan a star, that they made their money on her. And they didn't really care what happened to her.
Jayne Mansfield was going to be the next Marilyn Monroe. When Marilyn died, everybody went, right, now's her chance. You know, now she can push over and, you know, the things that Marilyn was doing, and, you know, here's Jayne already. Didn't work out that way.
Take me to your greenhouse, baby. I'd like to see your gladiolas grow. I'd like to tiptoe through your tulips. So pucker up and let me know.
She had no choices. She had no choices at all. And unfortunately, because she had embedded this image in the public eye of being this sexy, you know, beautiful blonde, those were the only kind of like roles that were available, were those dumb, sexy blonde images. A whole era of roles created by the image of Marilyn Monroe. She had no control at all. She had to do what she was told.
Things happened, but it shouldn't have happened. In one period, it seems like everybody just wanted to use her, do just like, you know, you squeezing an orange. There's no more squeeze in there, but you're still squeezing it.
It always fell on Mickey to kind of keep the domestic elements together. And he was wonderful in that regard. I mean, everyone who knew him and knew them as a couple said that he really was the cement in her life. He was the one who held it all together.
She started doing things which she should have never done.
Some of her early life and her appetite for men had begun to intrude back in her personal life. So even though Mickey was looking for basically a settled and quiet domestic life, Jayne at this stage had begun to have relationships, and these created an enormous amount of stress within the relationship.
The point is reached when I said something. It was when in here and when out there.
Jayne didn't ever want to give up show business, and when she wasn't young enough to be the blonde of the time, she had to move on. So she started looking toward Las Vegas and looking toward the stage and thinking about singing, because where else could she go?
But she was talented, she could sing, and it went back to her young life when she was playing the piano and the violin, and that she had a musical aptitude.
Once again, Jayne headed for Las Vegas in an attempt to capitalize on her profile. But now, the audience expected a more and more explicit act, and Jayne, eager to please, gave it to them. The overt sexuality of Jayne's shows began to spill into her private life, While Mickey stayed at home to mind the children, Jayne embarked on a string of affairs, which pushed the marriage to breaking point.
Mickey was protective and defensive of Jayne in the best possible way because he really loved her, and she loved him. And in a simpler, better world, if she'd had less of a drive for publicity and fame, they would have been, I think, compatible. I think everyone felt that.
Despite the birth of a fourth child, Mariska, by 1964, Jayne had decided it was over between them.
Jayne made the decision one day to divorce him and made the announcement to the press with Mickey standing right next to her, Mickey not even knowing.
The new man in her life was theatre director Matt Cimber. Jayne looked to Cimber to give her gravitas as a serious actress, but he was oblivious to her potential.
When Jayne's career really began to nosedive, she went back into theatre, and Matt Cimber was a Jewish New York director with some theatre experience, and he promised her the earth, moon and stars in terms of rebuilding her Hollywood career.
Everybody says, boy, she must be really a hot number. I didn't think so. I know more secretaries and more, you know, I mean, not to negate, you know, what she, not to negate what she had as a sex symbol, as being, you know, when you say sex symbol, what does that mean? Jayne was never more to me than a pinup.
It was going to be like Arthur Miller to Marilyn Monroe, that she thought it was going to be the twist that she needed to get that new respected image that she wanted so badly.
But he had no knowledge or experience of Hollywood at all, and that's what he promised Jayne. So the problem with Matt was he was promising Jayne something that he couldn't deliver, but he was a good talker, as May said, and he basically talked his way into her affections and into her career.
It was kind of a relationship of convenience, and subsequently spawned another child from.
The birth of Cimber's son, Tony, didn't stop the volatile marriage quickly disintegrating. Mickey, as ever, was there to pick up the pieces.
Mickey was really her best friend, and Mickey was there always. Mickey was there from the beginning to the end.
She was abusing substances. Her career was going down the drain because she wasn't keeping an eye on it. She was marrying and divorcing men. She had children to take care of. She had a difficult time. She was getting older, and she didn't like it at all.
She needed the money, and unfortunately, it put her in a lot of places where I know deep down that she didn't want to be, but she went where the paycheck was.
Jayne Mansfield went downhill at accelerating motion.
Wouldn't you really admit, Miss Mansfield, that it's simply sex that's got you where you are now?
Oh, well, I don't know if it's only sex. I mean, I think it's really sort of a, you know, kind of making people have fun, you know, enjoy themselves and all. But, excuse me, I'm changing.
But most people do think of you as a sex symbol. Do you mind that?
No, I think it's fun. I dig it. I think it's very campy. I mean, I sort of dig being sexy, don't you?
Everyone just thought that she was a no-talent tramp in a lot of ways, and that her only talent was that the top of her dress could fall down or her bra could fly off at the most inopportune times. Jayne was, you know, picked up and carried drunk, passed out of nightclubs in Las Vegas. They would throw her, like, you know, in the back room behind stage on a couch to sleep it off. I mean, she would go to parties and just have to, like, rely on someone to get her home, and sometimes she didn't get home. She would wind up with whoever she went home with. I think that she became so wild and so reckless that she didn't have any control.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jayne Mansfield.
When I was attending an oil show in Tulsa, Oklahoma,
And she was there in town and performing at a nightclub. And it was, well, I'm glad they didn't turn the lights up. You know, it was a bad-looking place. And so, yes, I was disappointed that it had come to that. And back in the little teeny tiny dressing room back there, and her husband was selling pictures of her for 50 cents a piece, and that was a real shocker. She gave me one free.
She became a very sad figure, a joke, a sad joke.
Middle 60s, when her relationship with Matt Cimber was in chaos, and it was in chaos. It was a very physical and aggressive relationship, and they were fighting with each other, and Mickey was trying to act as oil on the water and calm things down. Jayne got involved with a lawyer called Sam Brody.
Sam Brody was the divorce attorney that she was using from her divorce from Matt Cimber. And Matt was a smart man. Matt is a very smart man, and wanted full custody of Tony, and there was no way that Jayne was going to allow that. So she needed to get down and dirty, and Sam was a down and dirty attorney. And I think that at that period in her life, it was just so much easier to start a romance with Sam than to pay for his services. Sam, was a big drinker. He had a very bad temper. Jayne was very verbal. Jayne was not timid. And the two of them together was a toxic, very toxic union.
As Jayne's life and career went into freefall, she sought increasingly desperate forms of support.
Brody brought her to the Church of Satan in San Francisco, where she met this alleged Satanist, an actor actually, called Anton LaVey, who played the devil in Rosemary's Baby.
Anton LaVey, to me, was a man who really, really was the closest I have ever come to believing that anyone on earth could command some sort of occult power, because I could go on forever about the things that happened to people who crossed him in this town. And even though Jayne Mansfield didn't cross him, she happened to be with Sam Brody, the man he had put a curse on. And Anton LaVey warned her. He said to Jayne Mansfield, "Do not hang around this man anymore. I have told him he has less than a year to live, Jayne."
Brody was the wrong guy at the wrong time. But I'm not so sure any guy could have really dealt with it at the time. I think the only person who could have dealt with it was Jayne herself.
With Brody determined to wring the last drops of publicity from Jayne's image, he drove her on to accept an extensive tour of down-market nightclubs throughout Britain and the US.
Miss Mansfield's nocturnal regime is a hard one. Supported by various vitamin pills, she does 2 shows a night at 2 different clubs, for which it's said she gets about £500. Her reception so far hasn't exactly been overwhelming. The critics, who for years have been writing showbiz jokes about her pneumatic superstructure, now suggest that the physical emphasis in entertainment has moved elsewhere. Are you tired of being a sex symbol?
No, I'm not tired. I just want to enlarge in my assets.
How much longer do you think you can be a sex symbol?
Forever, darling.
Just after midnight on the 28th of June 1967, Jayne, Brody, 3 of her children and 20-year-old driver Ronnie Harrelson set out on Route 90 from Biloxi, Mississippi, to drive to New Orleans for an appearance the following day.
She was playing at Biloxi in Mississippi, and it was a nightclub engagement, which was one of many. I mean, she was really on whistle-stop tours at this stage, very exhausted, very drained, very burned out. And that night, she had an engagement the next morning to do a kind of a good morning show.
At that period in her life, she was not a good early riser. And what she wanted to do was, while she was still awake, was she wanted to get her and the family to New Orleans so they could stay in a hotel so she could be right there.
She was wearing a dress with these little circle little beads on it. When you put your hands on it, it was kind of like rough. And I was hanging out in the dressing room, and we had to leave to go to another show that night.
After her last show at Gus's, which ended around 1:45 in the morning, Gus said, "Here, my wife's car is here. It's a late model Buick. You can all fit in it, and I'll get somebody to drive you."
We were driving in the car, and my brother and sister and I were kind of sleeping, and I was up and sleeping and up and sleeping, and then at a point my mom had stopped off.
Against Brody's wishes, Jayne stopped off to call Mickey.
She calls me. I said, "Where are you calling from?" She says, "I'm over here in a filling station putting some gas in, and I'm getting the children in the back seat that they can sleep. There's still a couple of hours to go." And I hear it in the background of an anger voice, which sounded like that's a wrong thing for her to do, to call at that time. So I gathered where it's coming from. I was coming from her companion, and she said, "Well," he said, honey, I gotta go, I gotta go," and she hung up.
Nobody knew that Ronnie Harrison had about 2 hours sleep in the past 3 days. And, you know, Ronnie wanted to get to New Orleans, drop them off, and get back so he could go to sleep. So, unfortunately, you know, their ride became their last.
There was a lorry ahead, a mosquito spraying lorry. It was putting up clouds of mist behind it as it was spraying, and somehow this young, tired driver miscalculated, and they ploughed under the flatbed at the back of the lorry, and the front seat passengers were effectively decapitated.
A bulletin has just been handed to me. Hollywood star, the buxom and beautiful Jayne Mansfield, is dead. She was killed instantly when the car she was riding in collided with a truck a few miles from New Orleans early this morning.
A flaming, grinding car crash ended the bright movie career of famed Jayne Mansfield on June 29, 1967. Jayne Mansfield died while driving to New Orleans. At 33 years of age, Hollywood's smartest dumb blonde lay at the side of the road. She died instantly and was almost decapitated.
Next minute, you know, I see people in the back trying to pull us out. We got pulled out, and then we're on the way. And I was thinking about my sister Mariska. They go, "Mariska?" As soon as they heard that, they went back and they said, "Oh, gee, there's another person in the car." So they went back and they got her, and she was stuck underneath the seat. So
I hear a doorbell ring. And I open the door, and I see a marshal, state police. And he called me by name right away. And he said, "Mickey, I'm very sorry, but that's what happened. Your wife has died in an accident, and the 3 children are in a hospital." I went to the hospital. I saw the children. They all totally in bad shape. So Mickey is cast in one side, and then little Mariska, you know, sweet darling child. She had to have a major operation on her head.
To many, Jayne Mansfield died as she had lived, the fast and furious high life of the Hollywood blonde bombshell. But she was buried, according to her wishes, many miles away from the bright lights.
2 weeks after I met Jayne, we went to Penorjo, a little Pennsylvania Dutch town. She showed me about where she went to school, where she went on a swing, a kindergarten. But the last, she took me out to the cemetery where her father was buried when he was 34 years old. She said, I'm not going to have a long life. I'm going to die probably 34 too. And she said, I want to be buried right here. And that's where she is today. So
we healed, and from that point on, it was kind of more or less an emotional and a mental healing. Things do get better, no matter how things, happen, because that's how she would want it.
That's the way it goes. I know what I am. You said it yourself. A prostitute.
Ironically, Jayne's last film performance in Matt Simba's Single Room Furnished gave her the chance of the serious role she'd always hoped for.
I don't think we'll ever know whether Jayne Mansfield had the ability to be a great actress or not. We don't know how good she could have been because she was never given the opportunity.
Unfortunately, convincing distributors about the new look Mansfield proved difficult, and the film was never given a general release.
Go away, Billy, for your own good.
I'm not afraid. I know what you mean to me, and that could never change.
Couldn't it? I could tell you stories, Billy, that'd make you run out of this room in no time flat. Stories about the men I've known. In this very room, the kinds of men that you couldn't imagine in your wildest dreams, and what they wanted. You think you have problems? Well, I could tell you stories that, except I don't remember them much myself anymore. But I tell you this, prostitute is a beautiful word compared to whore and some of the others.
Jayne Mansfield may never be thought of as a great actress, but to her family and fans, she will always be remembered as a mother and as a star whose life and image personified an era.
It's a very difficult thing to live with and to grow with all your life, but I found ways to work it out. She gave me a detailed baby book about myself, and every time she would dot an I, she would put a little heart by it, and she wouldn't miss a heart. And her writing would be just so beautiful, and I have that.
I think she was a smashing personality who can adapt herself to any condition, and she was a super actress.
What Jayne Mansfield created, and the image we have of her in the pin-up image, which is a really idealized, beautiful image at its best in terms of the human sex goddess image, that was a creation of Jayne Mansfield's. There was no Hollywood hand in that. In that sense, it was a feminist victory. She took a knowledge that she had about, if you like, a weakness in men and in the male audience, and she turned it into something that was really solid gold.